Hello everyone, peace be upon you. Before we begin, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe, and stay with me until the end of the story. Also, leave a comment telling me which city and country you're watching from. I'd love to see how far my story has reached. For those of you who have already subscribed, I sincerely wish you good health, ease in all your affairs, abundant blessings, and may all your hopes and dreams come true. Amen. Now, let's begin the story. The transport van groaned to a stop under the Nevada sun and Rachel Monroe stepped down onto heat-shimmered asphalt outside Fort Anderson Advanced Combat Training Facility, her left leg catching the weight with a tiny hitch she made look like careful footing. Mid-30s, hair tight to regs, sleeves rolled, uniform clean, she moved with the quiet economy of someone who counted exits without thinking. The admin desk didn't care who she used to be, a keycard slid across, Echo Wing, room 214, don't be late. The barracks smelled like disinfectant and decades of boots. She claimed the last bunk in the far corner, back to the wall, view of the door, habit more than choice. In the mess hall she ate alone by the window, tray squared, utensils lined, eyes drifting, not staring, mapping rhythms, who stood where, who talked too loud, who watched their corners. Hale held court 3 tables over with Brooks, Torres, and Porter orbiting his easy grin. Hale had that crisp officer confidence, perfect posture, perfect teeth, the kind earned by never being truly tested. Brooks looked like a recruitment poster with a chip on his shoulder. Torres was bigger than the chair he sat in and liked it that way. Porter laughed half a beat late at everything, nerves showing at the edges. Mia Collins kept to herself near the end of another table, the only one who didn't glance away when Rachel passed. Out on Desert Urban Combat Range, Zone Delta, the targets wavered at distance in the dry air. Should be free points, Hale said loud enough for anyone to hear. Rachel's first string went wide. The reload that should have been muscle memory snagged a fraction, magazine angle off, seconds bleeding. When the horn sounded, her silhouette looked like someone learning the job, not living it for years. Riley, the Master Chief, watched from shade he didn't need, eyes narrowing, not at the misses but at the way she cleared and re-indexed afterward, too smooth for the score she'd just posted. Hale made sure his commentary traveled. Some records don't transfer, he told the boys. Brooks cracked his knuckles and smirked. Porter did that high laugh that read as apology to the loudest voice. Rachel kept moving. The kill house smelled like plywood and powder. Containers cut into rooms, hallways turning on themselves, instructors pacing with timers and clipboards. Rachel stacked at the first door, breath steady, weapon ready, and then she moved, but the first target got the hostage before she cleared the threshold. Red buzzer. She pushed faster on the next, but her angles were off by inches that mattered, muzzle high on entry, low on sweep, and the course punished every misread. Airsoft cracks whipped past her ear and for half a second the walls weren't plywood anymore, they were someplace tighter, darker, and the sound wasn't training safe. Monroe, a voice cut in, instructor tone, and the room came back into focus. She finished the lane, bottom third. In staging, Hale's voice carried again, painful to watch. Brooks added, try accounting, and Torres just smiled, the kind that wasn't friendly. Mia glanced once, then went back to taping her knuckles, saying nothing. Back in Echo Wing that night, Rachel cleaned her rifle slow and exact, buffer spring whispering as it seated, hands steady even when the laughter a few bunks overrode the room like heat. Riley passed outside the door, didn't interrupt, didn't need to. The next morning before dawn she was on the line alone, running manipulations in the half-light, emergency reloads, malfunctions, transitions, movements crisp enough to make a liar out of yesterday's scorecard. Riley watched from distance, arms folded, the look of a man adding up numbers that should cancel but didn't. Obstacle field Bravo should have been straightforward, wall, rope, crawl, tires. She cleared the wall clean, paced the rope bridge like a metronome, slid under the wire without catching a stitch. Then a flashbang sim cracked the air, white light, pressure thump, and Rachel stopped cold. Not a tactical pause, not a breath, a full freeze like a switch had been flipped off. 10 seconds, 15. Instructors shouting time. Other trainees finished and slapped backs. Hale's crew made sure their faces were turned the right direction to see. Rachel blinked hard once, moved again, finished near the bottom. By evening, the label traveled faster than the chow line, dead weight. In the mess, Hale lifted his voice just enough. Planning to visit the range again, tourist? Brooks chuckled into his cup. Porter nodded at nothing. Torres rolled his shoulders like he had a point to make if anyone asked. Rachel kept the same pace past their table and out the door, jaw tight for a count of 1 and then slack again. Riley watched all of it, but what he watched most were the in-betweens, how she sat with her back protected, how she never left gear sloppy, how her eyes mapped space like a habit, not a plan. On the schedule board, eval windows tightened. Failures stack, and programs don't wait. The instructors didn't raise their voices, they didn't need to. One more week like this and the paperwork would write itself. Mia found Rachel at the water station after lights out, didn't try to make it a talk. "You're here early every morning," she said, like it was weather. "Helps," Rachel answered. Mia nodded once. "See you out there." It wasn't a friendship, just an acknowledgement that not everyone needed to be the loudest person in the room. The next day's urban lane started the same, Hale leading loud, Brooks flexing in doorways, Torres filling space, Porter trailing, Rachel posted rear because that's where she was told to be. She moved careful, too careful, checking corners that were clear, giving timing away. Another failure. Another note on a clipboard. Riley signed it, eyes still doing the math. When the vans idled back toward Echo Wing, dust curling in the evening light, the base felt like it was holding its breath. Somewhere behind admin, an engine deeper and smoother than the vans rolled through the gate and parked by the office. No one said anything yet. Rachel didn't look. She knew better than to telegraph interest. She set her tray down in the mess hall, ate quietly, and listened to a conversation that wasn't meant for her about a visitor with government plates and an attitude you could feel from 100 feet. The night settled over Fort Anderson dry and relentless. Rachel laid out her gear, wiped dust from the optic she hadn't needed, and set her alarm for a time earlier than anyone sensible would claim. Riley's clipboard lay on his nightstand 2 buildings over, a dismissal form half-filled, a margin note none of the trainees would ever read. The course would keep moving tomorrow. Either she would move with it, or it would move without her, and the morning made that choice feel closer than ever. Before dawn, Rachel was on the line again, running dry drills while the horizon was still a gray stripe. Mag in, seat, tug, rack, reset. The motions were clean, the kind you only see on people who've done this long enough to stop thinking about it. By first formation the yard was already hot. Hale called assignments like he was on a stage, put himself at point, handed Rachel the rear, and told the others to keep tempo. Zone Delta didn't forgive tempo issues. First building, Hale rushed the door for the stopwatch, Brooks cut a corner, Porter stumbled across a threshold, and when Rachel checked a blind pocket that none of them cared to check, it cost a second they pretended was a minute. The buzzers marked friendlies, dead, and Hale spun it into her fault. Rear was dragging, he said to the instructor, loud enough for the wall to hear. Torres cracked his neck like the conversation was a workout. Porter laughed, that jittery, too bright sound. Mia kept her eyes down and reloaded in silence. Riley marked a box on his clipboard and didn't look satisfied about it. Midday on Obstacle Field Bravo, the flashbang simulator punched the air again. Rachel flinched hard, palms suddenly damp inside gloves, a heat all its own behind her eyes. She forced her feet to move, cleared the lane, but the clock didn't care about effort. The board did its job, another slow time near the bottom. By chow, the phrase, dead weight, had grown teeth. Maybe logistics is hiring, Brooks said to nobody in particular. Hale smirked without breaking bite rhythm. Torres added nothing, he didn't have to. Rachel ate her food, dumped her tray, and left. Riley caught the exit with a glance, then checked a form tucked behind his schedule sheet. After lunch came the team exercise that was supposed to be the big one for the week, multi-building sequence, hostages, unknown shooters, civilian no-shoots. Perfect for exposing gaps. They stacked on building 1, and the timing fell apart in the door because everyone wanted to be first through it. A role player tagged Porter before the second room. Buzzer. Another tag on Brooks 3 rooms later when he overran a corner Rachel hadn't cleared yet because the angle was wrong for the way Hale drove the team. Buzzer. At extraction, Hale's voice was bright with performative frustration. "We can't carry this pace," he told the cadre. "Rear security is killing us." Rachel said nothing and stowed gear. Riley signed off the lane, then walked over to the admin office. Nobody heard the conversation, but everyone saw the look on the ops sergeant's face when Riley left. By late afternoon the air felt heavier than heat should make it. At the board by the armory, a notice went up: any trainee flagged for cumulative performance deficiencies would face a comprehensive evaluation Friday. Failure meant separation from the course. Names were not listed, but nobody needed a list. Porter read the paper, whistled low, and shut up when Mia looked at him. Hale didn't whistle. He just smiled like a prophecy had finally come true. Rachel studied the notice for exactly one breath, then walked to the range shed and started stripping her rifle for a cleaning it didn't need. That was when the engine note cut through the bass noise, deeper than the vans, smoother than the forklifts. Heads turned. A black SUV rolled through the gate like it belonged there, government plates catching the sun, windows dark enough to throw back faces. It parked near admin, doors opened. 2 figures got out. One was a driver. The other carried authority-like weight that didn't show on paper, broad-shouldered, weathered, uniform neat without being loud. He moved like he'd learned to see problems before they formed. Nobody had to tell anyone his name for the yard to go quiet. Commander Nathan Cross spoke to the gate corporal, then walked straight for operations. Hale muttered, "Navy," under his breath, as if the word explained the air. Brooks asked, "Why would a SEAL be out here?" Porter said, "Maybe he's recruiting," and heard how thin that sounded. Mia didn't say anything. Riley met Cross outside the office. They shook hands like men who'd read each other's records. Cross glanced downrange once, taking in Zone Delta, Obstacle Field Bravo, Echo Wing, the mess hall, like he was building a map in his head. Rachel kept cleaning. She didn't look up. Not looking is its own tell. 10 minutes later, Riley and Cross crossed the gravel toward the staging area. The cadre got busy with clipboards that didn't need attention, trainees tried to look casual, and the base settled into that hushed space where everyone is pretending not to watch. Cross stopped near the line where the next urban run would step off. He didn't raise his voice. "Chief," he said, "I'm here to observe." Riley nodded once. "Understood." Hale's grin twitched. "Guess we're getting an audience," he told his guys. Brooks straightened his kit. Porter swallowed. Torres rolled his shoulders. Mia checked Rachel's mag stack without making it a scene. The next scenario spun up. Same target package. Same clock. Same team order because Hale said so. Rachel slid into the rear slot again, quiet as ever, and the radios popped alive. Riley stood off to the side, arms folded, eyes on Rachel more than the lane. Cross laced his hands behind his back and watched like he'd paid for the view. The horn sounded. Hale drove the stack, Rachel fell in, and the first doorway took its tax like always. A role player tagged Porter. Buzzer. Hale cursed into the mic, "Pick it up." Another room, another sloppy angle, a near miss for Brooks that would have been a body bag on a bad day. Rachel moved careful, too careful, checking lines no one else believed in. From the fence line, someone said under their breath, "Same old show." Cross didn't respond. He just kept tracking Rachel's hands, her footwork, the way her eyes landed half a second before her muzzle. He looked like a man waiting for a cue only he could hear. At the end of Building 2, the team stalled on a hallway crossroads. Hale jabbed left. Rachel's head turned right, a micro-hesitation, the kind that had been getting her killed on paper. The clock 8 more seconds. The instructor's pens hovered. Riley exhaled once through his nose. The SUV sat in the heat like a question. Cross finally stepped half a pace forward, not enough to break rules, enough to make everyone in earshot notice. He glanced at Riley, got a single, almost invisible nod, then looked down the hallway where Rachel stood too still. What he said next didn't carry to the crowd, but Rachel heard it clear in her ear as if it was the only voice on the net. Monroe, ghost knife, execute. It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. The words landed like a switch being thrown. The hallway noise fell away, the timers and buzzers and Hale's running commentary receding until there was only geometry and timing and air. Her breath settled into a cadence she hadn't felt since another life. Her shoulders came down one notch, muzzle indexed to the angle without conscious correction, feet aligning heel to toe on the hallway seemed like it was a rail she'd always walked. Hale started to bark a left call again, but she was already moving, not fast in a way that looked reckless, fast in a way that looked inevitable. She flowed past him at the breakpoint, checked the off angle he'd been ignoring, and caught the role player's barrel just as it cleared a door jamb. 2 rounds would have been center mass on a live run, here it was a clean tag that made the evaluator flinch like he'd been the one hit. Hale swore into the mic. Brooks took half a step back to let her through without admitting he'd yielded space. Torres watched her hands like he was trying to learn a language on the fly. Porter simply forgot to breathe. At the far end of the corridor, a split stair led to a catwalk. Rachel swapped shoulders to keep the muzzle legal through the narrow choke, eyes already picking up the mirrored glare off a target's protective mask. She didn't think about the swap, just did it, sling tension perfect, stock locked under the cheekbone, elbow rolling so the optic didn't bounce. The first corner broke open to AT. She sliced the pie just enough, not so wide she'd give up a backfield angle, not so shallow she'd lose time to a late correction. Clear right, she said, voice even. Hale managed a grudging, moving, like he'd been the one to call it. In the next room, a no-shoot hostage hung at a bad angle, cardboard hostage's shoulder overlapping the red silhouette by a hair. She adjusted the footwork, shifted weight to the ball of her rear foot, and took the shot that would have split cloth from bone in the world that wasn't built from plywood. The instructor's pen stuttered, then moved again. Riley stood offline with his arms still folded, but his jaw unclenched a fraction. Cross didn't change expression at all. He'd expected this. The lane planners had built in a false corridor with a mirror to trap anyone running autopilot. Rachel picked up the bounce on the first pass, didn't buy the reflection, pivoted to the blind and tagged the stand-in before its spring camera could snap a kill frame. Who taught you that? Brooks muttered, mostly to himself. She almost smiled because the answer would have meant explaining years he didn't need to know about. In the stack, Mia had stopped pretending not to watch. She reloaded by feel and let Rachel set the pace without saying it out loud. The comms chatter thinned. People talk less when the work starts making sense. At the final bend before the courtyard, Hale tried to call a wide breach for optics because he liked how it looked from the catwalk. Rachel shook her head once, small and final, and knifed the angle instead, using the doorway as cover, elbows tight, muzzle tracking air like she could see lines nobody else saw. 2 targets popped on staggered timers. She shot them in the order they became problems, not the order they appeared, which is a difference that keeps teammates alive. They streamed into the courtyard clean. The clock, which had been bleeding them for 2 weeks, suddenly stopped bleeding. Seconds began to come back like a refund. On the catwalk, an evaluator leaned into another and said, not quietly enough, where was this? Riley heard it and didn't answer because he didn't have the classification to. Cross heard it and didn't bother to explain classification to curiosity. Out at the fence, a small knot of trainees who weren't on the lane had drifted closer under the pretense of refilling canteens. Same team, one asked. Same Rachel, another said, like the name might be different if he said it softer. The answer was yes and no at the same time. Same person, same hands, same kit. Different access. Inside the hallway again, they hit the apartment mock-up with the hostage room at the end of a dogleg. Hale started to stack for a center-fed entry that would have pinned them in a fatal cone. Rachel put a palm on his shoulder and moved him an inch, not a shove, just a correction, then took number 1 without announcing it. She peeked the hinge side, found the threat lines, and paused not to think but to let timing sync with the target motors she could hear behind the wall. "On me," she said. Even Hale said, "On you," back because there are moments when rank is less relevant than competence. She went at the door like she'd built it. The moment stretched the way moments do when everything slows down, and then the room broke open to angles and light and shapes that used to be a problem and suddenly weren't. Outside, the bass noise crept back, the forklift, the range horn 2 lanes over, someone swearing at a jammed mag, but it all felt like it was happening far away. Porter, who had been a magnet for every bad outcome all week, followed Rachel's path exactly for once and didn't die. Brooks kept his muzzle out of the ceiling. Torres didn't try to shoulder people out of space they needed. Mia mirrored Rachel's footwork and bumped her reload at the exact step that made sense, and the reload handed itself over like 2 halves of the same move. At a window cut, Rachel saw a paper silhouette in a hoodie posed like a civilian with a phone. She didn't buy the misdirection and didn't shoot it, and a second target behind the fake civilian snapped open late. She was already pivoting. The evaluator's stopwatch clicked. Somewhere behind the line, a rumor about Friday's eval fluttered and died on someone's lips. Cross shifted his weight for the first time since he'd arrived, not impatient, just confirming that the thing he'd come to see was real and repeatable. Riley glanced at him and got nothing back except the steady look of a man who'd already said what mattered. The lane arrowed toward the final corridor. Rachel's breathing didn't change. She wasn't sprinting. It just looked that way because nothing snagged. Doors opened at the right speed. Corners paid their taxes without argument. The team's comms were quiet enough that words meant something again. Hale tried to retake the front with a clipped, "I've got it," and Rachel let him, not because he'd earned it but because the geometry said it was fine now. She drifted to the angle where the team's blind spot lived and erased it. The horn at the start line screamed for the next squad to prep. The sun shifted a hair and threw a long shadow from the SUV across the gravel like a line they'd already crossed. The hostage room was ahead, the one the cadre liked to save for last because it made confident teams hesitate. Rachel read the door, read the hinge, read the floor scuffs, read the way the air moved when a timer spun up behind cheap plywood. She looked exactly once at the team, then back at the handle. "Set," she said. The word hung there, simple and complete, and everything after it was a consequence. Hale's hand hit the latch, Rachel cut the angle tight, and the room snapped open like a sprung trap. 2 red silhouettes on staggered timers, one high left behind a rolling office chair, one low right half hidden behind a filing cabinet with a cardboard hostage offset just enough to bait sloppy eyes. Rachel didn't buy the bait. She took the low threat first because it would shoot sooner, snapped the muzzle to the high shape and broke a second tag before Hale finished his first step. "Clear left," she called without raising her voice. Mia slid past and scooped the hostage prop, pivoted to body shield the centerline the way you do when you expect late surprises, and Rachel was already reading the vent cut above the door where the lane designers love to hide a drop target. It hissed down on a delay. She hit it mid-travel before it finished dropping, a shot that looked cocky if you didn't understand timing and looked inevitable if you did. Brooks started to say something and didn't. Torres swung to cover a blind like he'd been doing it for years. Porter tracked his muzzle like it was on rails for the first time since arrival. Hale, whose voice usually filled rooms, kept quiet and moved his feet. They flowed out again, the corridor leading to a final choke where a faux stairwell dumped into a sunshot courtyard. Outside light blew the eyes for half a second. Rachel squinted against the white and didn't pause, shoulders angling so the optic didn't wash, muzzle feathering right then left as a pair of stand-ups kicked from behind painted cars. She tagged them in the order they became problems, then shouldered through the last frame and punched the buzzer at the extraction zone. The success tone rose and held. Silence followed, the clean kind, the kind that means the room ran out of opinions. An evaluator looked down at a stopwatch like it had betrayed him. Another tapped his pen against a board, then stopped tapping. The time that flashed on the tablet was an answer nobody wanted to say out loud first. Course record, and not by a breath. By a margin. Riley let the breath he'd been holding go the way men do when they remember how to breathe on purpose. Cross didn't celebrate, he just nodded once, the smallest movement, like a man confirming a calculation. Hale lifted his faceplate slowly, eyes stuck on Rachel with something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite admiration, a space in between where certainty goes to die. Brooks asked the air, what just happened, and the air didn't answer. Porter laughed once from leftover nerves and then clamped his mouth shut. Mia bumped Rachel's shoulder with the back of her hand, not a high five, just contact to prove the moment was real. Nice work, she said, plain as water. Rachel saved her rifle, checked her mag count like she'd only done a routine lane. The dangerous thing that had been in her a minute ago folded back down into whatever quiet she carried the rest of the time. The cadre tried to look official while word shot down the yard to echo wing faster than any radio. A black SUV sat in the heat and said nothing. Riley stepped forward and gave the administrative version of "good run," then looked at Cross like it was his turn. Cross kept his voice low. "Chief, we should talk." He glanced at Rachel and gave the kind of nod that carried more weight than a speech. Hale opened his mouth, closed it, then turned to his team. "Reset," he said, because leaders need words, and those were the only ones he had left. Brooks picked up brass that didn't need picking up. Torres stared at the door they'd just come through like it might explain itself if he glared long enough. Porter wandered toward the water can and drank like a man who'd outrun something only he could see. Mia quietly stacked targets to keep her hands busy. On the far fence line the spectators drifted back to their lanes with 100 new theories and none of the clearances to test them. In the shade behind the staging tables, Riley led Cross and Rachel into the narrow strip of space where the clipboards lived. Nobody turned off the range noise, it just felt like it dimmed on its own. Riley said, "That phrase, careful." Cross said, "Authorization," like a man stating a weather pattern. Rachel met Riley's eyes for the first time all week. "I wasn't allowed," she said. "Now I am." She didn't offer more. Riley didn't ask for what he couldn't put on paper. "Room 3A, Cross said, meaning evaluation hall, and Riley signaled the ops sergeant. Within minutes the three of them were walking across the gravel, boots crunching, heat slapping off the concrete walls, the base pretending it wasn't watching them go. Hale followed 3 paces behind because curiosity outranks pride when your world tilts. Brooks and Torres trailed until Riley flicked 2 fingers and sent them back with a look that said this part wasn't for them. Mia stood still at the edge of the shade line like she might anchor the day if she didn't move. Inside room 3A the air was cooler and the lighting meaner. Gray paint, metal table, 2 chairs facing each other like an argument, a third against the wall for people who supervised arguments. Rachel broke down her rifle by reflex, bolt carrier group on a rag, hands steady. Cross took the standing spot, Riley sat. The door swung shut with a heavy latch. Outside, the success tone still echoed like it wanted to prove a point. "You know who I am," Cross said to Rachel. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." "And you know why I used those words?" Another non-question. "Yes, sir." Riley said, "You're telling me she could do this the whole time?" Cross looked at him. "I'm telling you she's exactly who you thought she might be when you kept signing those bottom third scores and didn't file the dismissal last night." Riley didn't flinch because he had almost filed it. "Conditioning?" he asked, testing the word. Rachel said, "Containment," because that was closer. "Until authorized." Cross's eyes didn't soften, but the way he spoke did. "She's done work that doesn't show up on your board. The kind of missions that never got an exercise ribbon. The program fits a leash for reasons that made sense to people who never had to wear it. He let that sit. Riley looked at Rachel's hands, scar line across a knuckle, a faint burn along the thumb where hot brass must have kissed skin at some point, and decided there were stories he wasn't going to ask for. "The record stands," he said. "It stands," Cross answered. "And the Friday eval?" Riley asked. "She'll pass," Cross said, but the tone made it sound less like a prediction and more like he'd just marked it on a calendar. Rachel reassembled the rifle by feel. The bolt slid home with that clean mechanical finality small arms people never stop loving. "What happens now?" Riley asked, meaning paperwork, assignments, fallout. Cross gave the smallest of shrugs. "You run your course. I'll send a note up the chain. A recommendation will appear where a dismissal used to be. She can finish here or step sideways into instruction. It's her call. She's earned one." The door opened long enough for an ops corporal to lean in with a printout. Riley read the time, exhaled, and slid it into a folder. "They're going to ask me where it came from," he said. Cross smiled without showing teeth. "Tell them good training finally clicked." Back on the yard, the heat had started to slide toward late afternoon. Hale stood under the shade tarp with a face that couldn't decide who he was, the version of himself who had always been best or the version who just watched his map of the world redraw without asking permission. Brooks found the words, "No way, that was luck," and, for once, nobody answered with a joke. Torres stared at his hands like they might carry instructions if he looked long enough. Porter wrote Rachel's path in the dust with his boot toe and then scrubbed it out because he didn't want anyone to see he'd done it. Mia saw it anyway and said nothing. When Rachel, Cross, and Riley came out of 3A, nobody applauded, nobody booed. The base just breathed. Cross offered a hand. Rachel took it. "You good?" he asked. "Good enough," she said. It was honest. Riley tapped his clipboard once, like a judge with a gavel only he could hear, and cleared his throat. "We have lanes to run," he said to the world, which is what you say when you need the world to keep moving. The cadre fell in. The next squad took their start point. The SUV waited like a period at the end of a sentence nobody wanted to read out loud. As Rachel walked past Hale's crew, Brooks and Torres found something on the ground to study. Porter looked like he might speak and then didn't, and Mia gave Rachel the smallest tilt of her chin, which was more than respect and less than ceremony. At the board by the armory, the record time posted next to her name. It wouldn't come down before graduation. It might not come down for a long time. That night, Echo Wing was quieter. The jokes thinned. Someone turned a page in a paperback and didn't remember the line he'd just read. Rachel laid out her kit in the same order she always had, set her alarm for the same hard hour, and closed her eyes. The base slept around her because that's what bases do between the days when they learn something new and the mornings when they pretend they always knew it arrived with a sky the color of chalk and a breeze that smelled like dust and coffee. Reveille rolled across Echo Wing and the barracks shook off the quiet. Rachel woke to the same alarm, swung her feet to the same scuffed floor, and built her kit in the same order, but the room felt a degree different, like someone had adjusted the angle of the world by a single click. At formation, Riley read the board in his dry voice and skipped the part where names get flagged. The comprehensive Friday eval stayed on the schedule, but the sting was gone from the way the cadre watched her. Hale barked the day's plan with fewer flourishes, kept his eyes off Rachel, and managed not to over-explain every decision. Brooks looked smaller in the morning light. Torres stretched like a man trying to shake out a story. Porter stood straight for once. Mia found Rachel on the edge of the chalked square and asked nothing with her face and got everything she needed from Rachel's nod. Zone Delta ran hot early. The plan called for variant lanes, more civilian no-shoots, more stuttered timing, trip wires for ego. Rachel played the job the same way she had before the record, no show, no teaching on the fly, just doing her part, letting Hale lead where his call wouldn't get someone killed, nudging tempo with a footstep here, a shoulder angle there. They passed clean enough to keep the board quiet. Riley made notes that didn't look like ammunition for a dismissal memo anymore. Between evolutions, Cross drifted the perimeter like a shadow that had permission to be daylight. He didn't intervene. He didn't need to. People behave differently under certain kinds of gravity. By midday, word from admin made it official: the recommendation to separate had been withdrawn. A different recommendation was being drafted, one that used phrases like Advanced Tactical Instruction and Special Operations Training Command. It wasn't printed yet, but everyone knew. Hale read the mood like it was a report he didn't write. He called a short huddle by the staging tables and kept it practical: entries, angles, comms, brevity. Then he turned to Rachel and, after a visible swallow, said, "Monroe, anything to add?" She shook her head. "Run the plan," she said. The relief on his face was both ridiculous and human, and it bled some poison out of the circle. Brooks found her on the way to chow and started an apology that didn't know its own legs. Look, I didn't know," he said. "We shouldn't have." Rachel spared him and didn't make it a ceremony. "Stay in your lane, keep your muzzle where it belongs," she said. "That's the apology." Brooks nodded too fast, like someone had just handed him a simple job and he could finally do it. Porter caught Rachel alone at the water point and got farther than Brooks. "We were wrong," he said, voice low. "I was wrong. Thanks for not letting me die yesterday." She took a sip and nearly smiled. "That was you," she said. "You stepped where you were supposed to." Torres didn't come over. He trained like a man who'd been handed a mirror and didn't like the angle and decided to fix the face rather than the glass. In the mess, the noise shifted shape. Less snickering, more gear talk, more quiet pencil scratching over maps. Mia slid a tray across from Rachel and ate like conversation didn't need words. After a while she said, "They'll want you to teach." Rachel set her fork down. "Maybe. You'll be good at it," Mia said. "You don't waste motion." The afternoon brought the eval walkthrough for Friday. Cadre marched the squads across the lane blueprint, pointed out boundaries they would not repeat tomorrow, reminded them that penalties didn't care about intent. Rachel listened, logged the geometry, and felt none of the dread that used to curl behind her ribs. The leash was still there. Conditioning doesn't vanish because a phrase opened the door once, but it was no longer strangling the part of her that knew how to move. On the admin rail outside Evaluation Hall, a folder with her name caught a paperclip that hadn't been there yesterday. Riley stood under the overhang and flicked his eyes toward it when she approached. "It's not signed," he said, "but it will be." She didn't touch the folder. "You sure?" "I fought the wrong fight for 2 weeks," he said. "I can fight the right one for 10 minutes. Inside room 3A, Cross waited with a cup of black coffee and the posture of a man who expected arguments and had already burned through his patience for them in other zip codes. "You got options," he said, as if they were discussing bus routes. "Finish this course, take the patch, move to the command and teach, or step back into places that don't print maps. Your call." Rachel looked at the table's dented edge, the scarred paint, the corner where someone had carved initials and then sanded them out. "I can still do it," she said, not bragging, just inventorying. "I know," Cross said. "So does anyone who watched yesterday without lying to themselves." "But should I?" she asked. Cross considered the ceiling like the right words might be up there. People who write plans love leashes. Sometimes they're right. Sometimes they forget leashes cut skin. He took a breath. "You've carried the heavy end long enough." Riley said nothing, because he'd been a different kind of leash yesterday and he knew it. Outside, Hale ran his team through a dry stack while Brooks and Torres tried not to bump each other into bad angles, and Porter whispered counts under his breath so his feet would stop getting ahead of his rifle. Mia watched and corrected a hand here, a foot there, the way good soldiers do when they start seeing the whole picture. The sun rolled lower, turning the gravel into a field of sparks. The bass sounded like habit again. That's when the ops sergeant brought the paper, still warm from the printer. Riley read it, then handed it to Rachel. If you want it, he said. She scanned the words. Advanced Tactical Instructor. Report date. Location. Return option. She looked at Cross. He didn't nod, didn't shake his head. He let the silence sit, the kind of silence that belongs to grown people making grown choices. She signed. Relief didn't rush her, it settled slow, like a weight learning there was a table under it after weeks of holding itself up. You'll still run Friday, Riley said. Everyone does. Wouldn't miss it, she said. Word spread before she hit the door. It always does. Brooke said, instructor, and tried the word like a size he might grow into. Torres grunted something that could have been respect if you squinted. Porter grinned with all his teeth and then remembered to wipe it off. Mia squeezed Rachel's forearm once, quick. Good, she said. Evening fell in with its usual chores. Kits got scrubbed. Optics got wiped. Boots got lined heel-toe like small promises. At lights out, Echo Wing breathed an easier rhythm. Rachel rolled onto her back and stared at the dark ceiling until the dark stared back gentler than it had in years. Somewhere out beyond the fence, the highway hummed toward cities where nobody knew her name, and that was fine. In the lot by admin, the black SUV waited for morning. Cross would leave at first light because that's how these visits end. Riley would show up early with a calm face and a pen. Hale would decide whether the version of himself that learned something today could show up tomorrow. And Rachel would step onto the line for Friday, not because she had to prove anything but because good endings deserve clean punctuation. Dawn smudged the horizon the color of old steel and the yard woke in layers, boots on concrete, range horns testing, the rattle of targets warming up on their tracks. Echo Wing filed out with the sleepy discipline of people who know exactly how their day will hurt. Riley read the board without drama and left space where a threat used to live. Cross stood by the SUV with a thermos and the posture of departure. He gave Rachel a nod that meant two things at once: go do your work, I've seen enough, and then he climbed into the passenger seat but didn't tell the driver to roll quite yet. Hale gathered his squad under the shade tarp and kept it simple: run it clean, no hero moves, talk less. Brooks cracked a joke that landed softer than it would have last week and got a few real smiles. Torres bounced on his heels like he wanted the clock to start. Porter counted under his breath and then stopped when he saw Mia's look. Rachel checked her plates, smoothed a thumb over a scratch on her handguard, and felt the strange quiet that comes when the story has decided to cooperate. The comprehensive eval wasn't trying to surprise anyone, it was trying to catch them where they lived. Building 1 was center-fed and yawning. Hale called the stack and didn't fight for the loudest angle, he'd learned something and he showed it. Rachel took rear because assignments are a kind of peace. The door broke and the room came at them in a rush of paper and compressed air. They cleared it like a drill they'd secretly been rehearsing in their sleep. The second building tried to bait impatience with a long hallway and a panic timer, the kind that makes people shoot shadows. Porter saw his shadow and didn't shoot it. Rachel saw him not shoot it and let the approval sit as silence, which is louder than praise when you're trying to keep a brain from shaking. Outside, Cross watched the yard clock instead of the lane, measuring a bigger thing. Riley's pen ticked boxes with none of the old resignation. Zone Delta pushed them toward the courtyard Rachel had burned through the day before, but today wasn't about speed for its own sake. It was about making the same good choice twice. Hale called a breach that made sense. Brooks didn't overrun the corner. Torres covered a blind with his muzzle exactly where it belonged. Mia flowed like she'd finally made peace with how much she was paying attention. Rachel filled the gaps the plan couldn't name and didn't chase hero shots. The horn at extraction chimed the clean tone and the cadre chalked green on the board. Riley let that one pass without blinking and sent them to obstacle field Bravo. The rope bridge shifted 1 inch in the wind, the way it always does right when legs start to shake. Rachel paced it like a metronome and felt that old flicker under her ribs when the flashbang sim faked a thunderclap. She didn't freeze. She acknowledged it, here you are, and moved anyway. The clock was honest. The board wrote numbers that didn't lie. Hale's crew bled less than they had any right to. At chow, the mess hall smelled like coffee and heat and something else, relief, maybe, or humility figuring out where to sit. Brooks tried a good run and made it sound like respect instead of a headline. Torres said nothing but put his tray down across from Rachel like the table wasn't mine after all. Porter ate fast and careful and didn't spill. Mia nudged Rachel's boot with hers and tilted her head toward the yard like, go on, see it the way it looks now. Afternoon put them in the evaluation hall for the debrief, room 3A, air cool and unkind under the lights. The cadre didn't speechify. They ran the tape, paused where decisions had mattered, pointed at a foot here, a barrel there. When the screen held a freeze frame of the earlier choke point, Riley tapped the laser on Rachel's shoulder angle and said, this is the fix we were missing. Hale didn't bristle, he leaned forward to memorize it. Brooks scribbled notes like a man who had discovered ink yesterday. Torres traced the movement with his index finger in the air. Porter didn't breathe for 3 beats and then remembered. Mia asked the one question that made the room better, how do we teach this without teaching it wrong? Rachel answered without drama, reps and rules. Then exceptions, but only after the rules are real. When it ended, nobody clapped. They didn't need applause. They needed orders. Riley delivered them in a voice that had shaved itself clean of doubt. Monroe, he said, report to admin after formation. New orders to sign. You'll finish the course with your class. You'll wear the patch. Then you'll go teach people who think they're ready to hear you. She nodded. The paper waited 2 doors down, a quiet guarantee. Outside, Cross finally told the driver to start the engine. He didn't call Rachel over, it wasn't that kind of ending. But the SUV rolled slow past the hall and stopped on its own like endings sometimes do. The window dropped. Cross looked at her across the yard that had tried to unmake her and failed. You're good, he said. It was the smallest sentence anyone had given her, and it fit. Be careful with those words, she said back, not quite smiling. They turn things on. His mouth twitched. Then I'll use them sparingly. The SUV pulled away and became part of the heat shimmer and then part of the road. Evening soaked into Fort Anderson with its usual chores. Gear got broken down. Boots lined heel to toe. The record stayed on the board like a dare someone else could accept later. Hale's voice found a new gear that sounded like a leader who had shed a skin. Brooks cut his own jokes in half and filled the empty space with work. Torres practiced the slow parts with the same intensity he used to waste on flexing. Porter grew quieter in a way that made him bigger. Mia wrote a list of drills and handed it to Rachel without introduction. Start here, she asked. Start here, Rachel said. Lights out came like a mercy. Echo Wing breathed the steady breath of people who'd met their version of themselves and decided not to flinch. Rachel lay on her back and let the ceiling be just a ceiling. Tomorrow would be signatures and handshakes and a formation where nobody knew what to say, so they'd settle for, well done, and mean it. The program would roll on, hungry and necessary. Some other soldier would show up with ghosts and habits and a face that made people underestimate them, and maybe that soldier would leave with a steadier spine because someone like Rachel stood on a range and showed what right looks like without making a banner out of it. She closed her eyes and heard the clean tone again, not the buzzer, the other one, the sound the course makes when a thing is finished properly. Out beyond the fence, the highway hummed. In here, the bass exhaled. Good endings don't announce themselves. They arrive, they hold still, and they let you start again.